They say you learn about success from failure. In order to become what you set out to be, first you need to fail. Essentially, you need to lose before you win. You need to hit a rut before you pull out of it, and you need to bet on yourself when no one else will. There's a million quotes out there about failure and how it makes you better, how it makes you stronger, and all these things in the long term. But if you need a real life example, just look at Cody Rhodes. April 2nd, 2022, that was the day Cody Rhodes completed the comeback back to the WWE, the place where he got his start all the way back in 2006. But what was once a promising second generation prospect wasn't seen like that by management. Instead, they believed he wasn't anything more than a mid-card talent who should wear a bodysuit and paint up his face. For fans of the WWE, this was supposed to be one of the guys, one of the stars of the future. He showed earmarkings and flashes of brilliance at times in the mid 2010s, but it never materialized, and in a few short years, he found himself at the bottom of the barrel, creatively, personally, and professionally. However, he had something to prove. He bet on himself, he rebuilt his career, showed the wrestling world what he was capable of, and turned a nightmare into the comeback of a lifetime. This is the story of Cody Rhodes and his WWE comeback. Names in the wrestling world can often make your presence larger. For Cody, he's the son of the legendary Dusty Rhodes and the half-brother of Dustin Rhodes, better known to WWE fans as Goldust. But what makes his dad so iconic? Dusty was a bleach blonde, charismatic character who did a lot for the wrestling business. Most notably, it was his character as a common man. Having a different look from people, Dusty was able to captivate audiences by telling them that, hey, I'm just like you. I'm just an ordinary dude working for my money. His magnetic interview style and charisma, being able to have audiences waiting for what he would say next. He was able to draw packed houses in places where it wasn't easy to do so. He was a booker in Jim Crockett Promotions, which would later morph into WCW. And of course, his famous rivalry with Ric Flair, which gave us the legendary Hard Times promo, one of the most well-known pieces of wrestling history ever. But what he also did was, Vince McMahon is always credited as the guy who's able to put on the first true supercard with WrestleMania 1. But Dusty created something called Starrcade. This is what many believe to be the first closed-circuit wrestling supercard, and it came 2 years before Mania. When his days in the ring were over, he became the creative director and head writer on NXT, helping the next generation find their way. And I can't overstate that. Go watch interviews, go hear these superstars talk. Dusty was so important in actually helping people find their voice. The generation of today we have Reigns, Charlotte, Sasha, Rollins, and so many others. That's all thanks to the tutelage of Dusty. And now we get to his son, Cody. Cody signed with OVW in 2006. He had a brief run as OVW Heavyweight Champion. Then he made his main roster debut a year later in 2007. He was in a segment with Randy Orton and his dad, and he had a small feud and his first ever main roster match with Orton as well. After this, he had feuds with Daivari, the world's greatest tag team, before he found himself against Hardcore Holly. These two had 3 matches, with Holly taking the win each time. Nonetheless, the upstart earned Holly's respect, and the two went on to win the tag team titles come the end of 2007. They held those titles until Night of Champions 2008, where they were going to take on Ted DiBiase and a mystery partner of his choosing. Well, that ended up being Cody Rhodes. Cody turned heel for the first time in his career, and alongside Ted, the two became tag team champions before they joined Randy Orton in the group known as Legacy. Each man on the team, well, they had a legacy to honor. Cody, the son of Dusty, Randy, the son of Cowboy Bob Orton, and Ted DiBiase, the son of the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. Randy Orton at this point was already established as one of the company's biggest stars, and giving him 2 young second-generation blue chippers seemed like a bridge for superstardom for both Ted and Cody. They, by having their name associated with Randy Orton, got eyes onto them immediately and even shined in tag team matches against DX, who had reunited. It truly did elevate them to the next level. So with that having done its job and the group having ran its course, by early 2010 the group all went their separate ways. Not before a WrestleMania triple threat match though. This was won by Randy Orton, and it kinda didn't make sense because giving the rub to either DiBiase or Rhodes would have helped. It's rumored that the breakout star was always pegged to be Ted DiBiase, so it's strange that they didn't have him win, but nonetheless, everyone was now on their own. After this, Cody was drafted to SmackDown and he proved that he was the real deal. Cody, for the first time in his career, was on his own. Once he got drafted to SmackDown, there was a poll asking WWE Divas who they thought the most attractive man in the locker room was, and the results showed Cody Rhodes. So he took what should have just been a throwaway poll and crafted it into his new character of Dashing Cody Rhodes. He'd come out, he was super protective of his face because he believed that's where the money was, and there would be weekly segments where Cody was just offering men's grooming tips to everyone, from how to shave your legs to how to keep your eyebrows looking sharp, and his character work was on full display. The narcissistic character was something that really showed that Cody on his own could do great work. Towards the end of 2010, Cody formed a tag team with Drew McIntyre, and the two even won the tag team titles before losing them shortly after. And you know how I told you he was really protective of his face? Well, in early 2011, he had a match with Rey Mysterio. He got hit in the face with Rey's knee brace, square in the nose, and that was what was most important to him. What was most important to him was now shattered. So he came back telling everyone not to look at him anymore, that he wasn't dashing anymore, showing the other side of the gimmick, undashing Cody Rhodes. He told everyone he required facial reconstructive surgery, and he wore a clear mask to the ring, which clearly showed there was nothing wrong with him. What he also started to do was he started to wear a towel to the ring to cover his face. That was to cover his face. Well, he also started to get members of the audience involved as well. He wanted people to wear paper bags over their heads so they could hide their imperfections and ugliness because it offended Cody. And what more could you want? Cody was showing earmarkings of a young stud who in a matter of a few years could be holding on to a world title. But before he could even think of a world title, he had to work his way up. That came in the form of the Intercontinental Championship. After a brief reunion with Ted DiBiase, he won the IC title from Ezekiel Jackson in the summer of 2012. And by the fall of that year, he brought back the classic Intercontinental Championship. Cody being someone who really respected the lineage of the IC title. Also, let's not forget that the IC title was always seen as that workhorse stepping stone title before an eventual world championship. By the end of the year, he was even taking on former world champions like Randy Orton. He reverted back to the dashing gimmick, and in late 2012, he transitioned into a feud with Booker T. Come the following year, he had a 40-minute showing in the Rumble, and he headed into WrestleMania facing off against the Big Show. He lost the title to him, and he gained it back a few weeks later. From here, he formed Team Rhodes Scholars with Damien Sandow, and they competed for the tag team titles but were unsuccessful. They disbanded, had a brief feud in 2013, and then they both went their separate ways. A year after Cody did some of the best character work, he was in this weird place and he was just there. He was lost. 2013, of course, was also the birth of the Authority angle and the Yes movement. The story was still in its early stages and Triple H was throwing his weight around. Backstage, Cody came across Randy Orton perfectly enough, and he basically told Randy that he was avoiding Daniel Bryan and he should fight Daniel Bryan at the end of the night. Triple H asked Cody, didn't he have a wedding coming up? And in real life, Cody had gotten married to Brandy Rhodes. She at the time was known as Eden, so Triple H is like, I got you an early wedding gift, a match with Randy Orton, and you'll be fighting for your employment. Cody had some close falls in this match, but he would end up losing the match. This was of course to write him off so he could go on his honeymoon, and then after this, Triple H came out and he fired Cody Rhodes. As he was leaving, he cut a promo backstage talking about how the McMahons have hated the Rhodes, that they put his dad in polka dots and made him dance, and his brother in gold paint, and that he's never been the same. And now he had a wife to provide for, and they were just screwing him over. So Goldust took it upon himself to get Cody's job back, but he failed, and he also was on the unemployment line. So Stephanie talked about how the Rhodes were working class people and her family were millionaires. Since Dusty didn't pick a side, they were bullying poor old Dusty Rhodes. The Rhodes then did that thing where fired people hopped the guardrail and they attacked the Shield. So this led us to Battleground. If the Rhodes lose, they're done. They'll never fight in this company again. If they win, they have their job back. They went on to win this match at Battleground and a subsequent tag title match on Raw to become the new tag team champions. Great stories, great character work by Triple H, Stephanie, and the Rhodes and everyone else involved. It was a shorter story, but it was really, really enjoyable. Cody and Dusty held the tag team titles until the 2014 Royal Rumble, and over the next little bit, Cody and Goldust's momentum just started to fall and fall. Cody just gave up on the team, telling his brother that he should find someone else to tag with. WWE clearly didn't know what to do with both of them, and they were just stuck in this tag team hole essentially. Well, for Cody, the hole was about to get deeper. Cody returned. He was repackaged with the gimmick of Stardust, a take on his brother's character, and this is where the fall began for Cody Rhodes. The two won back the tag team titles in the summer of 2014, and everything was going alright. The brothers remained on the same page. They won the tag team titles a couple times, and in 2015, after eating losses, they started to feud. Goldust called Stardust Cody, and he told his dad Dusty that Cody was dead and Dusty may as well be too. This led us to a match at Fastlane. So here, both of them have stated that they had big plans for this feud, but they instead blew it off at Fastlane, even though they wanted to finish it at WrestleMania. Cody competed for the IC title at WrestleMania 31, and he just won his separate ways from Dustin. And from here, they had no creative behind him. He was basically enhancement fodder. He had a feud with Stephen Amell, would answer John Cena's US Open Challenge, formed the Cosmic Wasteland, and he had no momentum. The days of the promo cutting character-based Cody were gone. Oh, we don't have anybody to wrestle this guy? Put Cody out there. They didn't give him a chance, despite him pleading with the creative team to end the Stardust character and pitching different story idea after different story idea. They just continued to run with it. Until in 2016, he'd finally had enough. He requested his release from the WWE alongside his wife. He was creatively frustrated, and what made things worse was, unfortunately, his dad had passed away a year previous. Cody knew that he had more to offer, but the higher-ups just didn't see it with him. He was lost, his character was just there, and it was time for him to go. He was now a free man. He left the WWE, he was gonna bet on himself, and he went all in on this. Cody asking for his release was maybe the biggest blessing in his life. Following his WWE release, Cody went everywhere and he won and he won. He continued to go to as many promotions as he could to rebuild his name. While he was rebuilding in ROH, he met the Young Bucks and he joined the Bullet Club in New Japan. Then the group slowly started to break off into their own faction known as the Elite. Cody at this time completely overhauled his presentation. He was able to take audiences on a ride with his facial expressions, promos, his wrestling skills, and of course his ability to get audiences against and behind him. He went from the bottom of the barrel as this Goldust ripoff to building himself up as a legit star who displayed all the capabilities of a main event. But then something happened. In 2017, a Twitter user by the name of WWE Guy underscore tweeted Dave Meltzer, and he's like, hey, do you think that ROH can ever sell out an arena with 10k plus fans, something like Madison Square Garden? And Dave went, not anytime soon, to which Cody replied, I'll take that bet, Dave. I already gave them their highest buy rate, put the Bucks and I on the card, and 3 months to promote, and he CC'd Ring of Honor. And everyone's like, oh yeah, alright Cody, very funny, that's a cute little project you have there. Oh, he's serious. And he truly was serious about this. It's so ironic that we're in this digital age of social media and everything seems to blow up on there. And this was about to snowball into the biggest thing that North American wrestling had seen in quite some time. Not NXT, that of course is still WWE. What Cody was talking about was All In. Originally, the idea was to do an ROH show, but it morphed into a self-funded show which had some of the biggest names on the independents on the show. They managed to sell out the Sears Center in Chicago, which of course is no small feat. At All In, Cody won the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship, becoming the first ever second generation star to do so. Big story, feel good moment, that's awesome, good for Cody, but there was something bigger to come out of this. And that was that All In sold 10,000 tickets in 30 minutes. The show was a critical and commercial success. You make noise, it's gonna be heard, and it was heard by Tony Khan. Tony was in attendance that night, and he'd been a lifelong wrestling fan and in the most respectful way possible, a nerd of the business. His dad is Shahid Khan, who's a billionaire businessman who owns the Jacksonville Jaguars and Fulham FC. Tony saw once this show happened that there was a hunger for something other than what WWE was putting on. He approached the Elite with the idea of crafting their own promotion, and not just some little promotion. Something that would have the financial backing of the Khans, help lure in big independent names because the Elite's connection in the business, and of course the years of knowledge that everyone shared. By early 2019, the Elite's contracts with New Japan and ROH were up and they were ready to pursue this venture full flight. In 2018, Being the Elite, which is a YouTube compilation of skits, vlogs, and backstage banter and segments between wrestling stars, had become really popular among hardcore fans, and on that show was a clock that continued to tick and it continued to appear. At the same time, trademarks were filed for All Elite Wrestling and Double or Nothing. leading to rumors of possibly a new promotion. Well, the rumors became fact when on New Year's Day of 2019, the Elite announced All Elite Wrestling and their signature show Double or Nothing set for May of that year. The Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, and Cody Rhodes himself would be executive vice presidents of the brand. The tagline that we often saw during this time was Revolution. This is something different, that AEW was going to be revolutionary, whether you believe that or not, again, that's up to you. But the guy who was presented as the central figure of this whole operation was Cody. More than anyone else, it was Cody who was presented as the spokesman. He, like a top star, had great advertising skills, articulated well, and after all, he's the one who took up Meltzer on that bet. So it became very easy to get behind a guy who is showing his heart to the entire wrestling world. And I tell you this because his involvement in the creation of the company is just as important as the financial backing it received. Without him, fans probably don't have AEW. AEW never happens if Cody never answers that tweet. That brought us to Double or Nothing, AEW's first pay-per-view event. Cody faced off against his brother Dustin in a match billed as brother versus brother, generation versus generation. But before the match got underway, Cody was handed a sledgehammer, the signature weapon of Triple H of course. Cody went to the top of the stage and he smashed the throne. This was because Cody was drawing comparisons to Triple H, and Cody wanted to send this message that he wasn't just going to book himself as the guy. Him smashing the throne was of course a shot at the WWE, but also a shattering of the narrative that just because he was in a position of power, he wasn't gonna make himself look strong. The match at Double or Nothing was critically praised, invoking a ton of emotion from the audience and a ton of blood as well. Crazy, because this is what they wanted to do in 2015. Then they were covered in paint, and now they were covered in blood. After the match, Cody and Dustin shared an emotional moment when Cody asked him to be his tag team partner at the next show, and his momentum was just getting higher and higher. After all, this was the biggest face for people who didn't keep up with anything outside of the WWE. Cody was the guy. Cody was the guy who was in WWE just a few years prior. AEW spent the summer of 2019 building up their roster. They even announced that Chris Jericho would be joining the company. What was shrugged off by many as just a little side quest that could fail was showing that this was going to be full scale and this was gonna be legit. Cody was out to help build younger talents and newer stars. That's the goal that he said he always had. He fought Darby Allin at Fyter Fest, helping him become one of AEW's first original homegrown stars. Shawn Spears at All Out, who Cody was friends with all the way back to their days in OVW in 2006. And then he became on-screen best friends with MJF, who is the wrestling equivalent to Brad Marchand. Shout out to all four of you guys who understood that reference. Regardless, everyone could see it from a mile away that this wasn't going to end well for Cody. He wrestled in the first ever AEW Dynamite match against Sammy Guevara, and the launch of AEW Dynamite was seen as a huge success. It was something fresh in the wrestling business that so many had been wanting for so long. Cody, of course, was one of the founding fathers. Now it's important that we quickly take a look at Cody's run in AEW because things started to go wrong here a little bit, and it began at Full Gear 2019. See, heading in, Cody earned an AEW World title shot against Chris Jericho, who had just won the title. He also added a stipulation that if he lost, he'd never challenge for the AEW World Championship again. Because again, I'm an EVP, I'm not trying to abuse my power. That was the whole storyline behind this. He also in that same promo said that it took him 14 years to go from undesirable to undeniable. In hindsight, this is where AEW handcuffed themselves immediately. Cody went on to lose this match at Full Gear when MJF threw in the towel for him and later turned heel after the match, and now he couldn't challenge for the AEW World title. Instead, he was in a rivalry with MJF. Cody again using his star power with the hardcore fans to help introduce more fans to MJF. And this is where Cody was still at his most popular and his most lovable. Arn Anderson signed with AEW and became Cody's on-screen manager. So MJF in storyline made his best friend jump through all these hoops and everything in between to get a match with him, including a very well executed lashing segment on Dynamite where Cody had to take 10 lashes to the back. What this segment was able to do was it created this certain atmosphere of emotion, and to this day, this is still called one of, if not AEW's best segment. It was this silence and uneasiness that made Cody look like the ultimate babyface. He also wrestled Wardlow, another one of the company's best built stars, in AEW's first steel cage match, and that gave us this iconic visual of him hitting a moonsault from the top. Perk Cody was in full effect. At Revolution, Cody lost the match to MJF, so that was back-to-back pay-per-view losses, and this feud, to the surprise of many, was one and done. Also here, he unveiled what would really differentiate him from a lot of other wrestlers, the Nightmare Family logo on the right side of his neck. This is where everything started to go bad in the outside world. As the pandemic hit, fans weren't coming to shows, but AEW persisted. They held empty arena shows, and a dude who carried those on many nights was Cody Rhodes. He was the first person that everyone saw on that first Dynamite without fans. Front and center, Cody told us that everyone's gonna stand in the face of adversity. Cody brought this soothing calm to the chaos happening in the outside world. World title was out of the picture, and then came the TNT Championship, which the company said was going to be treated as close to a world title as they possibly could. Cody became the first ever TNT champion. Cody went John Cena US Open Challenge style when he introduced fans to people like Ricky Starks, Eddie Kingston. He wrestled Jungle Boy, and then he got destroyed for the title by Brody Lee in August of 2020. He had to go film the Go Big show, so he lost the title only to get it back when he returned a month later. This finish upset some fans. This was where the love towards Cody kinda started to really shift. He only lost the title because he had to go film a TV show. So essentially, Brody was a placeholder, and fans kind of started to question, is this guy really who he says he is? He started to become this fallen hero that he was being referred to as, or what people slowly started to compare him to, Homelander. He dropped the title to Darby Allin, and the thing with Rhodes was he was teetering between a good guy and a bad guy, and for some it was like, this dude's only in management to make himself look good, which as a wrestling fan, we're more vocal and more in the know than ever. And this really screwed up the perception on who this guy truly was. Cody was also starting to get lost on screen as well. Everything seemed a bit too much for the fans, from his entrance prelude to the excessive pyro to the bleeding to the crying. He started to come across as a tryhard on TV, and for many fans it seemed like he was selling out. Announcing his daughter in an over-the-top fashion, fans perceived it as Cody was here to make a name for himself and make himself the central figure. And I tell you this because it's important to know what the fan perception of the character was at the time too. Despite whatever fans thought of him though, he was still a huge star, one of the company's biggest. Now he went under the nickname The American Nightmare, a play on his dad's American Dream. He fought Shaq, feuded with QT Marshall in the Factory, but this sentiment for him to turn heel started to grow even more, and fans became agitated at him playing a good guy, and he slowly drifted away from the Elite on screen, and according to some reports, possibly backstage as well. The character of Cody Rhodes started to become really disconnected with AEW and their culture. And then things got worse. In came Anthony Ogogo. He was a student of Cody Rhodes in the Nightmare Factory, and there was this rookie versus veteran storyline which instead took the angle of nationalism when it just didn't need to. Cody doubled down on his patriotism, and naturally this was going to divide wrestling fans because it always does. Why was this happening? I still can't tell you. Then came the promo where everyone says Cody ended racism. It's just a joke, okay? If you don't follow wrestling online, it's an online joke. So he comes out, he pumps up America as a land of the free and how he wasn't gonna fall to an Englishman, and then he's like, I, a white man, came together with a black woman and we're going to have a child. And this man was out here acting like this had never happened before. So he's pumping up his soon-to-be born biracial daughter, which is awesome, right? You're having a kid, that's awesome. It wasn't so much that he's having a daughter, that's awesome. It was just the substance and inability to read the room in this promo, and it just made you look at this and go, like, dude, what are you saying? Why are you saying this on national television? The whole nationalist angle did not need to be involved in this story, and that was a sentiment from a lot of wrestling fans, and everyone was just getting tired of things. It was basically this story for the fourth time with Cody. He has a friend turns his back on him, and they have a feud. Anyways, Cody beat Anthony Ogogo, and everyone's like, yo, just turn heel, man. But again, he didn't. He feuded with Malachi Black, who got cheers even though he was the heel, and it was basically like the Brody Lee feud where he destroyed Cody. And it seemed like Cody went into panic mode. Fans weren't invested in him anymore, and he started to take off his boots. He put himself through a flaming hot table, and it was kind of this cry like, hey, look, care about me. We also got to talk about his wife. His wife had some pretty uninspiring and downright hated storylines in AEW, and this didn't help his cause with the fans. This wasn't because of a lack of talent. Cody had a newfound creative talent, and his ability to give fans an emotional match was unlike something many others could do. It was something truly special, and he was a star no matter how you want to spin it. One of AEW's biggest. It was just kind of this John Cena thing where he's like, no, I'm not turning heel, and here's why. Cody won the TNT title for a third time in his career, and he had a spectacular unification match with Sammy Guevara, who beat Cody Rhodes to become the official TNT champion. But there was a promo in here in which Cody said this.
I know Tony Khan has sent a contract in the mail to Sammy Guevara and myself. Maybe it's not the contract I wanted.
Maybe it's not the contract that I wanted, he said. Well, the match with Sammy Guevara would be Cody's final in AEW. Little did we know his deal with the company was up and he couldn't reach an agreement to stay. On February 15th, 2022, both Cody Rhodes and AEW put out statements announcing Cody's departure from the company, but fans, they didn't believe it. There's no way a founding father, a guy who did so much for AEW, was just gonna leave and possibly join the competition. Everyone was thinking that this is just Cody being Cody and stringing everyone along. Well, this was as real as it could get. Cody was leaving AEW and it was all but confirmed that he was headed back to the WWE. The Cody to WWE rumors were huge, but they weren't confirmed. During WrestleMania season, WWE ran a storyline in which Seth Rollins couldn't find a WrestleMania opponent. Vince said that he found him one of his choosing, and this led to even more speculation as to what Cody's next move was. That brought us to April 2nd, 2022, Dallas, Texas, night 1 of WrestleMania, and the moment of truth. As the anticipation builds, as the butterflies start in people's stomach, as everyone waits with bated breath, this is what we heard.
Wrestling has more than one royal family.
The rumors were in fact true. Kingdom played at AT&T Stadium and Cody Rhodes was back in the WWE. 60,000 go rabid in the arena, social media set ablaze, and shockwaves are sent throughout the entire wrestling world. And the thing here was nothing was different aside from the company. The same ring gear, the same music, the same gimmick, the same presentation. And keep in mind, Cody was able to come back while the company was still ran by Vince McMahon. He came back to that exact same regime who believed that he was nothing more than a mid-carder. The same people who didn't let him change his character despite him begging to do so. He came back to those exact same people, and 6 years later, for a lack of a better term, he gave them a middle finger right in the face, and he showed them that, look, I knew my worth, I left a well-paying job, I bet on myself, rebuilt my career from the ground up, and proved what my ceiling always was. Those same people called him to bring him back, and they ate their words. For 21 minutes, Seth Rollins and Cody Rhodes tore the house down. Without a rehearsal, there were no live events for them to iron things out. They were able to have audiences invested in a meeting of two of the industry's best talents. Cody took the win, and the next night, Cody told us why he was back. He was back to do what his father couldn't and win the WWE Championship. And there's been some speculation as to why Cody truly left. And he's addressed this by saying that it wasn't the money, he wanted to win the big one. His words, not mine. 2 more matches and a great rivalry between Rollins and Rhodes followed this. A great match at WrestleMania Backlash, and then a grueling, uneasy, just full-on barbaric Hell in a Cell match in which Cody walked in with a torn pectoral, also won by Cody Rhodes. And what can you even say? This is one of the greatest comebacks in wrestling history. This guy was dead, finished. WWE thought that he had reached his ceiling and he was done for. And then he went everywhere and he proved his worth to them. There had been some huge WWE to AEW defections, Danielson, Cole, Lee, FTR, but this was the first big one to the WWE, and the significance is huge. He said great things about AEW. Of course, he helped get it off the ground, and you can hate the character all you want, but the facts are the facts. They put themselves into a corner with his booking, plus his refusal to turn heel is what really soured his AEW run. But without him sharing time with Ricky Starks, with Darby Allin, with MJF, those people who still continue to grow their name today, those moments that he shared with them are huge, and his legacy in the company and what he's given that company is huge. There's also something poetic in how much Cody and Dusty's legacies have mirrored each other, because coming in, who really thought that Cody was gonna equal Dusty? Not very many people. Both men didn't just rely on what they were doing, they didn't just do the bare minimum. The family has proved that they always know their worth. For Cody, there's only one thing left to do, and that's to bring it full circle and become the WWE World Champion. The 6 years he was gone, he did a ton, and he literally went from undesirable to undeniable. Cody in his return has become a revelation to the company, the biggest WWE signing since AJ Styles in 2016. Everywhere you go, you see Cody shirts. Everywhere you look, Cody signs. Kids love him, adults love him. Cody so quickly after his return became accepted as the guy, the heir apparent in the company, and it's weird to say that about a guy who's nearing 40, but this whole story of him leaving, betting on himself, and proving his worth, then helping build an alternative company, and then coming back to where he began, is nothing short of a reinvention of a lifetime. His story shows that if you follow your dreams, don't accept no for an answer, put in the work, you can always show what you were always supposed to be. For a guy who calls himself the American Nightmare, he sure did turn a nightmare situation into the comeback of all comebacks. Thanks for watching.